how do you, and I think that's the fundamental question, is how do you get to that different way? And I think it just
what we're about to talk about then.
Yeah, and it starts with looking at the way we've learned to communicate. We've learned to language pretty much everything from the moment that we're born. We're in this society where, for the most part, it's about survival. We're trying to survive and fix scenarios and conversations. And the way we learn to communicate really is that our words try to fit the world as it's occurring around us. And that's sort of the world, like nowadays. I mean, we've been such a great example now is that we've got this COVID thing around the world, and we're seeing news of what's happening in other countries reacting like it's happening on our doorstep, rather than looking at, okay, what is it that's within my control on my doorstep that I can handle? So it's kind of like we're reacting to what's happening out there in the world, and then our internal dialogue kind of tries to replicate those same level of feelings. And how we language that, I mean, some of the ways we do that is we try to control conversations, we avoid conversations, we even withhold certain communication in order to get out of something, or we try to manipulate, or we try to force an outcome. But in short, that's a very reactive way of communicating. And it's so automatic that we don't realize that we're doing it.
Absolutely. And there's a premise which lies behind that, right? It's that when there's something to fix in the environment or with ourselves, there is already this idea there's something wrong.
Yeah.
So we're already starting from the idea that there is something broken or there is something wrong, Like, I want to give you an example where I think it's a kind of mythology, and that's the myth of the other half, right? Mm. When someone ends a relationship and, you say, well, that person was your other half, somehow you are now broken in some way because you're no longer in that relationship. Like, a little bit of yourself is meant to have been taken away with that person when they walked out the door. That's absurd. But we live as if that's the case. And so the grief which we can have around those relationships is potentially going to last a hell of a lot longer if we take it as true that we've actually lost part of ourselves. When if you actually think about it, it makes no sense at all. It's just, a construct which we've agreed to kind of think has some sort of reality. And so people have kind of gone, yeah, I am now so broken as a consequence. I had a breakup in December last year, and it came out of the blue. And I remember when it happened, there was probably a couple of days where I was crying into my steak, and I was, had a lot of tears, and I was like, how am I going to do? It was at a time where I was working on a big deadline. And I was like, oh, this is never going to happen. This person didn't want me to be happy, da, 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 da. And then I had a friend, and he was just like, look, you're creating the relationship from this scarcity point of view where, if it wasn't her, then it's not going to be anyone. What if you're looking at it from a point of view of the values which you want to have in a relationship, and you're choosing to go for that? So I was like, yeah, what would I want? I want to have adventure. I want discovery. I want passion. And those are the things which are consistent independently of who the person is. Yes. Right? And I could start to recognize from that those things were no longer there in that particular relationship. So while it wasn't the choice which I would have wanted her to make at that time, it was a brave choice. And in hindsight, I can really respect it for both of us.
And it was the right thing for you both.
Pardon?
And if anything else, it sounds like that was just the right thing for you both in terms of like what you really wanted versus what they may have wanted just wasn't there.
Yeah.
But yet the language that is commonly out there is we're attached to you're my other half or my better half. Whereas actually you're just two wholes walking concurrently.
Absolutely.
But yet it's like we lose something. I mean, yes, you lose a relationship, but you're still whole.
Yeah, but you also gain all the experience that you had from that relationship, right? Like I like to think of things as if everything's an opportunity, even where things don't go as planned, then what did I get to learn from that relationship? And I look back at that relationship, I learned so much, right? I learned about how much my capacity to love, independently of how someone else is doing, right? So I get to see what I got from that relationship, not what I lost. And I think that framing of things takes you from this space of like survival, there's something to fix, or there's an order to this space where we want to get to, which is really about like how we can feel in our creative power, where we can feel like we're not broken, we actually have it, we've got this independently of the circumstances, right?
Totally. So if we say, on the one hand, this kind of default old paradigm of communication is really survival based. We're trying to fix, we're trying to force outcomes, we're trying to manipulate, we're trying to avoid, resist, withhold. Like we're coming into a conversation already with a preconceived notion of how we want to get out the conversation, or what we want to get out the conversation or not. And we bring that in our relationships with our employers, our family, our partners, like pretty much everywhere, even the way we look at, say, money.
Yeah.
So if we have this way of trying to fix, survive the relationships that we have out there, what would be the opposite of that? And it's really speaking creatively, right? Like speaking in a way that what we say shapes our world rather than it being the other way around. And that really comes from, it's a bit of a process, but looking at, okay, what is it that you can give up coming into a conversation? And what are some of the things to let go of? Like, how can you actually just be engaged and kind of dance with the conversation and actually come from a place of like, just almost like a blank slate.
Yeah.
And just really listen and then start to create the kind of dialogue, the relationships, your experience of things.
Totally. And I think this speaks to what you were saying about the preconceived. If you go in with a preconceived idea of who someone is, what they're going to say, then ultimately we're going to stop listening pretty quickly, because we already we think we already know what they're going to say. Like, yeah. Certainly like 5 years ago, that was how I was with my mum. I was in a space where I knew exactly what she was going to say. I knew what she was going to talk about. And it felt like a vicious cycle. Like I was just irritated constantly because of it. And I would just either not want to spend time with her, or I would just be, not listening. I would be in my own head, just having a conversation about what was more important to me. Whereas now, like I actually have, this wonderful opportunity to live with my mom. And what I've really taken on with her is this idea that, do I really know who she is? I want to strip away all the preconceived notions that I have of who my mom is. And so what's happened as a consequence is I get to have conversations with her where I'm in a space of infinite curiosity. I'm taking my philosopher's hat and bringing it to my conversations with my mum about who she is, what her dreams and aspirations are, and the conversations that we get to have as a consequence are incredible.
Yeah.
But I want to say one thing, because I don't want to create some like happy clappy idea where there's never any kind of animosity. One thing is, there are times where we might have a little argument. But what we do, which removes us from this space of survival and then creates a space to get back into the creativity, is that whenever there is something where we disagree about it, we clean it up straight away. We don't allow it to fester. And I think at a time like this is really critical, because I can imagine things could play on your nerves when you have only the same people around you constantly. And if one thing happens, it can then just compile up, and eventually there could be an explosion because you haven't ever dealt with it. Whereas if you deal with it, either on the day or within the hour, you then get to go through your day and be free of any of the kind of worry and all the thoughts, the negative thoughts, which start to spiral in your mind if you have that still incomplete.
Yeah. And that's where, and I think that's the challenge. It's catching it in the moment rather than letting it fester. Because what happens when you fester is you will start to attach other things to validate your perspective. Whereas actually what's happening is you've just had a disagreement about something just now. And what we end up doing is, when we look at it from a reactive perspective, is we now stack that up against everything else that's happened. So you see, this is just more of the same. And actually it's even more of the same of our own judgments. And Sam and I have got an exercise for everyone to do. Sam, do you want to explain how you want to do this?
Well, remind me what the exercise is, mate, because I haven't got the...
Didn't we? So the idea of... actually, let's go with this one. So, everyone take a look. Like, we invite you to look at how you're communicating, from where you're communicating within in order to. So what that means is, take a scenario where you automatically you already know how that conversation is going to go. You try to want it to go differently, but invariably ends up going the same way. And look at it from the perspective of, are you trying to control the conversation? Are you trying to fix the outcome? Are you manipulating? Are you resisting? Or actually, are you in the conversation to not say much to get out the conversation? So what we like you to say is maybe the context of whether it's work or whether it's relationship, family member, whatever. So say the scenario and say whether you're protecting, avoiding, forcing an outcome, manipulating, or just withholding. So just take a few moments to look at that, and just share in the comments there. We've got a few more people who have joined. We've got Delia. Hi, Delia. We've got Emma. Johannes, hey, bud. How's it going? He's mentioned same with me and my mum, but thank God things have really changed today, which is great, like as we said. Arvin, Rishi, Michelle's also joined in from Miami as well. Hey, guys. And I think when we look at this exercise, like ultimately what we really want you guys to see is that where are you really trying to, where are you reacting, right? Where are you just reacting to a scenario by almost setting up the scenario? And I think that's the, when we did, of course, we did a few months ago when we looked at it, I think that was the kind of breakthrough thing for us, was that pretty much everything that we have, we've actually set it up that way because of what we were bringing into the conversation before we'd even said a word.
Yeah.
And that's all based on stories that we'd stacked up in the past. And what was your experience of that, Sam?
Yeah, I think it was a case where I really realized how much I was doing things in a case of in order to, or to fix something. And people thought that I was, if I was telling you about something which I was really passionate about, to them, it seemed like I was trying to fix them. When all I wanted to do was share, like, oh, I love this thing. Like, let me tell you about it. But that's not how it came across, because the communication wasn't coming from that place. And so people were actually like, thanks, mate, not for me, great. And I get that, because in hindsight, it made perfect sense, whereas what I got in that course that we did was really looking at how you can create love and affinity with anyone in a conversation, right? And that goes back to the idea for me of every conversation being an opportunity.
Yes.
I got these 5 conversations this week, which have created opportunities for me in the near future as a consequence. And sometimes I didn't know the person. I just had a conversation that's just been like, I understand the possibility of like who this person is. I don't know anything about them. Let's go. Yeah. And it's exciting, right? When you're living life from that point of view, independently of what's going outside, it's exciting. It's hard not to be excited.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. It's when you can just press pause on like your inner dialogue and your judgment and all of these things, you really bring this like just this creativeness to the conversation, in that you're not reacting. Like, you are with that person. You get to hear what they're saying. And they experience that. And therefore what we say really connects with them. And that's like the most sort of, like we talk about love and affinity, that's basically what it is, right? Where there's nothing in between you. And all you brought to the conversation was just parking everything that you've got coming into it and just being with any person. And this works with any person. And you're just there with them. You listen to what they're saying, and then have your words not react to what they're saying, but take in and then bring out from your perspective so that they get that you've heard them. And now you're putting something out there to them, and they get you, and they like, I don't think I've got the word for it right now, but it's like, it's almost like, yeah, it's kind of like a dance. Like you're entertaining and you're creating something in that conversation with anyone. And the outcomes that you can generate, not just for yourself, but for the other person, are totally like incredible.
Absolutely. On that point, mate, and I love the expression dancing in the conversation, because it's one I use all the time. And when I think of this, it's, for me, there is no agenda. There is no place to get to. You're literally in this space of discovery and wonder together. And that's where magic happens. because all you're doing is connecting. And it
Yep.
doesn't matter whether you're connecting with someone who's a family member, it doesn't matter connecting with someone who is a romantic relationship with, or someone you've never met before. When you are just fully present in that conversation, you get to really be with that person, even in a case where it's virtually. Because I've had so much of my communication with my sister, because she lives in Australia, over 10 years, through virtual, through FaceTime and Skype, when that was a big thing. And if without that, man, I wouldn't even really know who my sister is. But we constantly are in that space where there is no agenda.
Yes.
It's just like that. That's the magic. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's two things with that as well. And I think the first thing is you can be in a conversation with someone that you may not even get on with, but yet you're just with them in that moment. You may agree to disagree, but the thing is, whatever they say doesn't affect you, because actually they're just saying what they're saying and you're in the moment saying what you're saying.
Yeah.
And whilst you're in that conversation, you're able to then separate what someone says to you. That's not the truth. That's just their truth.
Totally. Yeah.
And it's like you get this sort of Teflon and it just kind of bounces off, because you're able to not even reject it, but just be with, okay, that's just what they said. Here's what I say. And what that really comes down to is being in the moment, but really knowing your purpose and having that purpose going into the conversation in terms of the why. Why am I having this conversation, rather than where do I want to get to in this conversation? And when you're in that inquiry about the why, that's where creativity comes in. And that's where you've got the power, like we said, dancing in the conversation, but you're able to give things up. Like someone could say something to you that may be totally false, inaccurate, and you don't take that on. Or you can really be of service of someone in that conversation because you're just there with them. Like you're just giving them a listening and an understanding and a curiosity to what they say, and still be in total power and not unaffected by what they say.
Yeah. And that's when you get to do that, it's like a superhuman ability, right? Because the thing about us, right, is as human beings, we are constantly being judged, whether it's from the social media point of view, whether it's in person, when we actually don't have social distancing. We grow up, there's something like, I'm trying to think what age it is, but they say something like, have like 150,000 no's by the time you've had 5,000 yeses in your life. So you've been told no 150,000 times, and yet, yes. So you're constantly taking on this place of being judged and taking on that judgment as something problematic about you. And you then take on what they're saying as something you need to deal with or to have to respond to, because you take it personally, because we've constantly been bombarded with this feeling of we're doing something wrong.
Yeah. And again, it kind of goes back to our earlier point of like comparison as like some kind of barometer to some other feeling or experience that really isn't binding. And you can go to town, and again, it kind of comes back to how do you take it? Do you react? Do you fit to what someone else is saying? Or actually, can you just bounce that right back and say, okay, there's a no here. It's not a no to me. There's something for them that has them say no. And how often do we then inquire, okay, what's behind the no? And use that as an avenue for us to serve ourselves and get feedback. Or, like we can handle rejection in a certain way, but actually understand, okay, what's the gap? Because it's not that they're rejecting you or you're rejecting them. There's something missing. Now, is that something missing when you find that out, something that you can add? Or if not, then okay, cool. There's just a mismatch of expectations.
Yeah.
And then actually, that's quite liberating, right? Like, and I suppose it's the scenario where so many people, we'll kind of go back to what we started talking about when we talk about people being given this label of being depressed or being anxious or having this and that, and any condition, like it's the life sentence, like that's it now. But actually being able to just be with that and say, okay, linguistically, you can frame it as there's something wrong. or look at it and say, what can I do with this? What is this telling me? If I'm having an anxious response to something, where does that come from? Rather than, I'm going to be anxious all my life now.
Yeah.
And just, we talk about how linguistics frame our experience from survival to creative. That's it, right? It's looking at what is this telling me versus what is this, am I taking this as a fixed thing, or rather, what can I do with it? Like,